My wife's father, the CEO, called security and said, "You're fired, boy." He made me hand over my badge in front of everyone at the monthly board meeting. 43 people watching. Some of them embarrassed for me, most just uncomfortable. A few openly smirking like they'd been waiting for this moment. I just smiled, nodded once and said, "Thank you for the opportunity, Richard." Then I added, "You might want to check your email." 10 seconds later, every screen in that glass-walled conference room went black. The CFO, Patricia Morrison, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh my God, he just locked our servers." The legal director, James Whitmore, actually collapsed into his chair, his face draining of color as he stared at his dead laptop. "He owns the patent," James said, his voice cracking. "The core patent, the one everything runs on." Richard Thornton, my father-in-law, and the man who'd just destroyed my career in the most public way possible, turned from security toward me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted panic. My name is River Pierce. I'm 32 years old, and 2 days after that board meeting, I sold a $10 billion patent to TechCore Industries, Richard's biggest competitor. But this story doesn't start with revenge. It starts 7 years earlier, with love, ambition, and the stupidest decision I ever made, trusting family. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story of corporate warfare and family betrayal, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below about the worst workplace betrayal you've ever witnessed, and smash that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. I met Sarah Thornton at a tech conference in Austin. She was 24, brilliant, with a degree in business analytics from Stanford, and eyes that could make you forget your own name. I was 25, fresh off my second startup failure, broke as hell, but sitting on an algorithm I knew would change everything. "Your presentation on distributed computing was actually interesting," she said, finding me at the hotel bar after my panel. "Most of these talks put me to sleep, but you made decentralized processing sound like poetry." I laughed, nursing a beer I'd been making last 2 hours because my bank account had exactly $400 in it. "Poetry doesn't usually involve that much linear algebra." "No," she agreed, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. "But the way you explained how data could flow through networks like water finding its level, that was elegant. You're wasted doing panel discussions. You should be building something." We talked until 3 in the morning. About technology, about dreams, about the future of computing and artificial intelligence, and how the world was going to change in ways most people couldn't even imagine yet. She told me about working at her father's company, Thornton Technologies, how she felt trapped in middle management despite her education, how she wanted to prove herself on her own terms. I told her about the patent I'd filed 3 months earlier. A revolutionary approach to data processing that could increase server efficiency by 300% while reducing energy consumption by half. The kind of breakthrough that would make someone very, very rich if they could bring it to market. "My father would kill to license something like that," Sarah said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Thornton Technologies runs data centers for half the Fortune 500. The energy costs alone are killing our margins." "I don't want to license it," I admitted. "I want to build a company around it. Change the industry, not just rent out my idea to someone else." Sarah looked at me for a long moment, then said something that would change my life forever. "What if you did both? What if you joined Thornton Technologies, implemented your patent there, and used the resources to prove it works at scale? Then you'd have the capital and credibility to spin it off into your own company later." It made sense. Perfect sense, actually. Except for one problem I didn't know about yet. Sarah's father, Richard Thornton, was the kind of man who saw everyone as either an asset to exploit or a threat to eliminate. And he'd spent 30 years building his company by being absolutely ruthless about which category people fell into. Sarah and I started dating. Within 6 months, we were living together in her apartment in Palo Alto, the kind of place I could never have afforded on my startup founder with no funding salary. Within a year, she'd introduced me to her father at a family dinner that felt more like a job interview. "Sarah tells me you've developed something interesting," Richard said, cutting into his steak with the precision of a surgeon. He was 58 then, silver-haired and fit in that way rich men achieve when they have personal trainers and private chefs. Everything about him screamed control, from his tailored suit to the way he'd arranged the seating at his dining room table so he sat at the head, elevated slightly above everyone else. A new approach to distributed data processing, I said, trying to sound confident but not arrogant. It could revolutionize how data centers operate. Richard dabbed his mouth with his napkin. Could or will? Will, sir. I've run the simulations. The math is solid. It just needs real-world implementation to prove the scalability. He studied me like I was a balance sheet he was trying to reconcile. Sarah says you're brilliant. That's high praise. My daughter doesn't throw that word around lightly. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with nervous energy. Her mother, Patricia, sat at the other end of the table, barely touching her food, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I'd learned later that Patricia had checked out of her marriage years ago, staying for appearance and the lifestyle Richard's money provided. Come work for me, Richard said suddenly. Thornton Technologies needs innovation. You need resources. We can help each other. Dad, Sarah said carefully, River wants to build his own company eventually. This would be more of a partnership arrangement. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Partnership. That's what family does, right? We partner. I should have heard the warning in his tone. Should have noticed how he said family before Sarah and I were even engaged. But I was 26, in love, and staring at an opportunity to bring my life's work to fruition with unlimited resources behind it. I said yes. The engagement happened 3 months after I joined Thornton Technologies. Richard insisted on paying for everything, a destination wedding in Napa Valley that cost more than most people's houses. 200 guests, most of them business contacts and clients Richard wanted to impress. This is your family now, Richard told me the night before the wedding, his hand heavy on my shoulder as we stood on the terrace of his vineyard estate. Family takes care of each other. You take care of Thornton Technologies. We take care of you. I implemented my patent within the first year. The results were even better than projected. Server efficiency increased by 320%. Energy costs dropped by 53%. Thornton Technologies saved $42 million in the first fiscal quarter alone. Richard made me Vice President of Innovation, gave me a corner office, a salary that seemed impossible after years of ramen noodle budgets, and public credit for the transformation I'd brought to the company. At board meetings, he'd gesture to the quarterly reports and say, "This is what happens when you bring in young talent. River has revolutionized our operations." I felt like I'd made it. Like all those years of struggling and failing and believing in an idea everyone else thought was crazy had finally paid off. What I didn't know was that Richard had been having his legal team examine my patent from the day Sarah first mentioned it, looking for loopholes, technicalities, any way to claim it as company property rather than my personal intellectual property. The problem for Richard was that I'd filed the patent 2 years before joining Thornton Technologies. It was ironclad, completely separate from any employment agreement or company resources. The implementation I'd done for Thornton Technologies was licensed to them, but I retained ownership of the core patent. For 3 years, this didn't matter. The company was making money. I was happy. Sarah and I bought a house in Los Altos Hills with a view of the San Francisco Bay. We talked about starting a family, maybe in another year or two once things settled down. But then TechCore Industries started making moves. They'd been Thornton Technologies' main competitor for a decade, always, one step behind in innovation and market share. Their new CEO, Miranda Walsh, was aggressive, hungry, and had a reputation for poaching top talent and acquiring game-changing technology. She reached out to me directly. An email that came to my personal account, not my work email, which should have told me something right there. River, I've been following your work with great interest. The data center optimization you've achieved at Thornton Technologies is remarkable. I'd love to discuss opportunities for collaboration. Perhaps we could meet for coffee? Nothing formal, just a conversation between people who appreciate innovation. I showed the email to Sarah that night over dinner. Miranda Walsh wants to meet with me. Should I be worried that your father's going to think I'm being disloyal even considering it? Sarah frowned, reading the email on my phone. Don't meet with her. Dad's paranoid about TechCore. He'll lose his mind if he finds out she's trying to recruit you. I'm not being recruited. She just wants to talk. River, trust me on this. My father doesn't see the difference. In his world, talking to the competition is the same as betrayal. I deleted the email and forgot about it. Or tried to. But Miranda was persistent. 2 more emails over the next month, each one more direct about wanting to discuss licensing opportunities for my patent technology. I should have told Richard about the outreach. Should have been transparent. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Richard had started treating me differently lately. Interrupting me in meetings, second-guessing my decisions, making comments about young people who think one success makes them irreplaceable. The 4th time Miranda reached out, I responded. Just a brief message saying I'd meet her for coffee, purely informational, no commitments. We met at a cafe in Menlo Park, neutral territory between our companies. Miranda was 45, sharp-eyed, dressed in that calculated, casual way successful Silicon Valley executives perfected. Expensive jeans and a simple blouse that probably cost more than my first car. I'm going to be direct, Miranda said after ordering coffee. Your patent is worth billions, not millions, billions. And you're letting Richard Thornton exploit it while paying you a salary that's generous for an executive but insulting for someone who created technology this transformative. I have a license agreement with Thornton Technologies, I said carefully. They're paying royalties. Miranda laughed. Are they? Have you actually audited those payments? Have you verified that they're calculating the royalties based on the actual value of your technology? I hadn't. Richard had assured me the accounting was being handled properly, and I'd trusted him because he was family. I've done my research, River. Thornton Technologies is paying you 0.02% of the revenue generated by your patent implementation. Industry standard for this kind of transformative technology would be closer to 5%. They're underpaying you by a factor of 250. The number hit me like cold water. I'd been so focused on the salary and title that I'd never questioned the royalty structure. Richard had presented it as generous, and I'd believed him. I'm prepared to offer you a very different arrangement, Miranda continued. License your patent to TechCore Industries. We'll pay you the industry standard 5% royalty, guaranteed for 10 years, plus equity in TechCore. You'd become one of our largest individual shareholders overnight. I did the math in my head. 5% of what TechCore would generate using my technology could be over $200 million annually. Why would you pay that much? I asked, suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. Because having your technology would let us destroy Thornton Technologies in the market, and because I believe in paying people what they're actually worth, not what I can get away with. I told Miranda I'd think about it. Drove home in a fog, my mind racing through the implications. That night, I opened my contract with Thornton Technologies and really read it for the first time since signing. Miranda was right. The royalty rate was criminally low. But what made my blood run cold was a clause buried on page 47, in dense legal language that would take a patent attorney to fully parse. It said that any improvements, modifications, or derivative works related to the patent created while I was employed by Thornton Technologies would become company property. I'd spent 3 years improving my original patent, making it more efficient, more scalable, more powerful. Every one of those improvements technically belonged to Richard now, according to this contract I'd signed without proper legal review, because I was young and in love and trusted my future father-in-law. I confronted Sarah that night. We were in our bedroom, and I could hear the anger in my own voice even though I was trying to stay calm. Did you know about this clause? Did you know your father was structuring the contract to steal my work? Sarah looked at the contract, her face going pale. River, I didn't read your employment agreement. That was between you and the legal department. Your father's legal department. Sarah, I've been improving this patent for 3 years. According to this, every improvement belongs to Thornton Technologies now, not me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, what are you going to do? I don't know. I need to talk to a patent attorney, figure out what I actually own at this point and what I've signed away. River, please be careful. My father doesn't react well when people challenge him. That should have told me everything I needed to know. My wife was more worried about her father's reaction than the fact that he'd essentially been stealing from me for 3 years. The patent attorney I consulted was a woman named Rebecca Chen, one of the best intellectual property lawyers in the Bay Area. Her office was in a high-rise in San Francisco with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge that probably cost more in rent than most people made in a year. The good news, Rebecca said after reviewing my contract and patent filing, is that your core patent is still yours. The improvements clause is concerning, but it's not retroactive. Anything you created before joining Thornton Technologies remains your property. And the improvements I've made since then? Legally, those belong to Thornton Technologies. But here's where it gets interesting. Your core patent is so fundamental that the improvements can't function without it. They're dependent technologies, which means Thornton Technologies can't use the improvements without licensing your core patent. I felt a strange calm settle over me. So if I pulled my patent license, their entire system would stop working. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Technically, yes. Though that would trigger a massive lawsuit. Richard Thornton would argue that you're acting in bad faith, trying to hold the company hostage. It would be ugly. What if I just didn't renew the license when it comes up for renewal? When does it renew? I pulled up the contract on my phone. 8 months from now. Rebecca smiled. Then you have 8 months to decide what you want your future to look like, and to document everything in case this goes to court. I started keeping records. Every email, every meeting note, every instance of Richard underpaying royalties or claiming credit for improvements I'd made. I backed up everything to secure cloud storage that Thornton Technologies couldn't access. And I started having more conversations with Miranda Walsh. The explosion came 6 months later at the monthly board meeting I mentioned at the beginning of this story. I'd informed Richard the week before that I wouldn't be renewing my patent license when it expired, that I'd found the royalty rate to be well below market value and would be seeking other arrangements. Richard had smiled when I told him. Actually smiled. River, I think we need to discuss this with the full board. Why don't you prepare a presentation for next month's meeting, explain your concerns, and we'll address them properly. I should have known he was setting me up. Should have recognized that a man who'd spent 3 years underpaying me wasn't suddenly going to become reasonable when I challenged him. The board meeting started normally enough. Financial reports, operational updates, strategic planning discussions. Then Richard stood up and gestured for me to join him at the head of the table. River has some concerns about his licensing arrangement that I think we should address as a group, Richard said, his voice friendly, almost paternal. River, why don't you explain your position? I stood up, opened my laptop to display my presentation, and began explaining the discrepancy between what I was being paid and industry-standard royalty rates. I showed the board comparisons with other patent licenses, documentation of the value my technology had created for the company, and a proposal for renegotiating the terms. I was 3 slides in when Richard interrupted me. This is fascinating, River, but I think there's something the board needs to know before we continue this discussion. He nodded to James Whitmore, the legal director, who stood up looking uncomfortable. River signed a comprehensive employment agreement when he joined Thornton Technologies, James said, his voice tight. That agreement includes a non-compete clause that prevents him from licensing his patent to any competing technology company for a period of 5 years following his employment. I felt the room shift. Several board members exchanged glances. I'm not leaving the company, I said carefully. I'm just asking for fair compensation. Are you? Richard asked, and his voice had gone cold. Because I have emails here between you and Miranda Walsh, CEO of TechCore Industries, our primary competitor. Multiple meetings where you discussed licensing arrangements. He projected his own presentation onto the screen, replacing mine. Screenshots of my emails with Miranda, coffee shop surveillance photos of our meetings, financial projections that made it look like I'd been negotiating behind Richard's back for months. This, Richard said, his voice rising, is corporate espionage, disloyalty, betrayal of the family that gave you everything. The family that gave me everything, not the company I'd saved $42 million, not acknowledging the patent that had revolutionized their operations. Family. Those meetings were exploratory, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have every right to understand my market value. Not while you're employed here, you don't, Richard shot back. He looked at the security guard standing by the door. Kevin, please escort Mr. Pierce from the building. He's terminated, effective immediately. The room went silent. Sarah was sitting in the back row watching this happen, and she said nothing. Just stared at her hands. You're firing me, I said, more to confirm it than because I didn't understand. You're fired, boy, Richard said, the word boy landing like a slap. Hand over your badge, your computer, your phone, everything that belongs to this company. 43 people were watching. Some embarrassed, most uncomfortable, a few smirking. I pulled my badge from my pocket, set it on the conference table, and smiled. "Thank you for the opportunity, Richard." Then I added, "You might want to check your email." I'd timed it perfectly. At exactly 10:47 a.m., the automated system I'd built triggered a complete license suspension. Every server running my patent implementation received an authentication request that could only be approved by me. Without that approval, the system defaulted to safe mode, which meant it shut down. Every screen in that conference room went black. The building's lights flickered as backup power kicked in. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm started beeping. "Oh my God," Patricia Morrison whispered. "He just locked our servers." James Whitmore collapsed into his chair. "He owns the patent, the core patent, the one everything runs on." Richard turned from the security guard toward me, and I saw it. The moment he realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. "You can't do this," Richard said, his voice shaking. "This is illegal. This is sabotage. This is me suspending a license that I own to a company that's no longer employing me," I corrected. "Your legal team will confirm that I have every right to do this. You just fired me, Richard, which means our licensing agreement is void." I walked out of that building with nothing but my personal phone and my car keys. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting. Clients calling about down servers. The IT department scrambling to figure out what had happened. Richard screaming at James Whitmore to fix it immediately. Sarah called me 6 times before I answered. When I finally picked up, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot watching security guards rush in and out of the building. "River, what the hell did you do?" she asked. "What I should have done 3 years ago," I replied. "Stood up for myself. You've destroyed my father's company. Do you have any idea how many clients are going to leave over this? Your father destroyed his own company the moment he decided to underpay me and then fire me in front of 43 people. So this is revenge? You're going to ruin him because your ego got hurt?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "Sarah, I gave that company 3 years of my life and technology worth billions. Your father paid me a fraction of what I was worth and then tried to humiliate me. This isn't revenge. This is business." "River, please. Turn the servers back on. We can fix this. Dad will apologize. We'll renegotiate everything." "Tell your father to check his email," I said, and hung up. The email I'd sent to Richard at 10:47 a.m. was simple. "Richard, effective immediately, I'm suspending the patent license for all Thornton Technologies systems. As per our agreement, termination of my employment voids the licensing arrangement. All systems will remain in safe mode until further notice. Regards, River Pierce." What Richard didn't know yet was that I'd sent a second email at 10:48 a.m. This one went to Miranda Walsh at TechCore Industries. "Miranda, I'm ready to discuss that licensing arrangement. Are you still interested?" She responded in 4 minutes. "Absolutely. How soon can you meet?" The next 48 hours were the most intense of my life. Miranda had her legal team on standby, and we hammered out an agreement that made my patent attorney smile like she'd just won the lottery. TechCore Industries would license my patent for 5% royalty of all revenue generated by its implementation, plus 10 million shares of TechCore stock, vesting immediately, plus a position as Chief Innovation Officer with full autonomy over my division. The kicker? TechCore would implement my technology across their entire infrastructure within 6 months, directly competing with Thornton Technologies' now crippled data center operations. "This is going to destroy Richard," Miranda said as we signed the contracts. "You understand that, right? Without your technology, Thornton Technologies can't compete. Their clients are going to migrate to us within a year." "I understand," I said. Richard tried everything to stop it. Lawsuits alleging breach of contract, theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage. His lawyers filed injunctions trying to prevent me from licensing to TechCore. They threatened Sarah, claiming she'd been complicit in my betrayal. Every case got thrown out. My patent was legitimate. My licensing agreement with Thornton Technologies had been terminated when Richard fired me. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd simply stopped letting someone steal from me. The media had a field day with it. Tech wunderkind destroys former employer after public firing. Patent war erupts in Silicon Valley. TechCore lands billion-dollar technology after rival CEO's catastrophic mistake. Sarah filed for divorce 3 weeks after I signed with TechCore. We met at a lawyer's office to discuss terms, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I hope you're happy," she said, signing papers that would untangle our shared life. You've destroyed my family. Your father destroyed your family, I corrected. I just refused to let him destroy me in the process. He gave you everything, River. Your career, your success, your life. I looked at the woman I'd loved enough to marry, the woman who'd stood by silently while her father publicly humiliated and fired me, and felt nothing but sadness for her. He gave me a salary, I said. I gave him billions in value. That's not a gift, Sarah. That's exploitation. She left without another word. 6 months later, TechCore Industries' stock had increased 40%, largely due to the implementation of my patent technology. My personal holdings were worth over $400 million. Thornton Technologies had lost 60% of their data center clients to TechCore and was facing bankruptcy. Richard sent me a message through his lawyers. He wanted to meet, discuss settling our differences, perhaps finding a way forward. I ignored it. A year later, Thornton Technologies sold their remaining assets to a private equity firm for pennies on the dollar. Richard retired, or was forced out depending on who you asked. The company he'd built over 30 years was dismantled and absorbed into competitors' operations. I felt no satisfaction in his destruction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences. Some people thought I went too far, that I should have been satisfied with my new position at TechCore, that destroying Thornton Technologies was overkill. But here's what those people don't understand. Richard Thornton didn't just fire me. He tried to humiliate me, control me, steal from me while wrapping it in the language of family and loyalty. He treated me like property instead of a partner. And when you treat people like property, you shouldn't be surprised when they walk away. Today I'm 32 years old, worth over $500 million, and running the innovation division at one of the most successful tech companies in the world. I've hired 20 of the best engineers I can find, people who remind me of myself at 25. Brilliant, hungry, full of ideas that could change everything. And I pay them what they're worth. Industry standard royalties when they create something revolutionary. Equity stakes that make them partners in success, not just employees. Respect, transparency, and trust. Because I learned something important from Richard Thornton. Not from his success, but from his failure. Loyalty is earned through respect, not demanded through family connections. Success comes from empowering people, not exploiting them. And the worst business decision you can ever make is underestimating someone because you think you own them. Richard called me boy in front of 43 people and thought he could break me with public humiliation. Instead, I smiled, said thank you, and walked out with $10 billion worth of technology he could never use again. That's not revenge. That's just math. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more tales of people who refuse to accept less than they deserved. Drop a comment below about standing up to corporate exploitation. And share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes walking away is the most powerful move you can make, because the best response to being underestimated isn't anger, it's success.